So, when it comes to the AI stuff, this is going to be a potentially hot take. I know there's going to be a lot of people who take issue with this, but there might be a group of people who also think that this is obvious. And they're like, yeah, this is pretty common sense. So, that's always the case. There's always two sides to every issue, probably more than two sides. But when it comes to like where we're headed with the AI thing, and when you look around, whether it's online or just if you're in tech or you know people who are familiar with this type of stuff, you're starting to see like a new type of interaction emerge. And that interaction is, put as simply as possible, you're having these certain types of people, and it could be everyone, it's not limited to a certain type of psychology, but you're having a certain type of person who starts interacting with these LLMs, whether it's GPT or it's Claude or Grok or whatever it is. And they're realizing that you can give it anything, you can give it any text, any hypothetical situation, any issue to be solved. And these AI models are trained, they are wired to give you some kind of confident sounding response. So I want to draw a distinction right here. And we've talked about this before, but the positive use case, the potential benefit and advantage when you use these models properly, I think is borderline unfathomable. Like it is when you have a structured what the fuck is it? Methodological approach, methodical approach. I think that's it. Shoot. When you have a rigorous, methodical approach to utilizing these tools for information and data consolidation and like things like self education, then there is frankly nothing that compares to these machines. There's nothing. I mean, these models are trained on incomprehensible amounts of data, and they are iterating and assessing that data in very intricate, complex ways every time you give it a prompt. So I don't think anyone really understands how they fully work or what's going on inside the reasoning lattice of these models. There's actually a lot of debate over that, and there's some controversy depending on what you're paying attention to. But the bottom line is, no one knows how these models really work and how they're like the key to reaching quote unquote super intelligence or artificially generated intelligence. And that's a whole nother conversation because my argument would be we haven't even defined those terms, so we don't know what type of benchmarks we're reaching. We can just compare them to specific metrics and specific levels of human intelligence, but we don't know what the phenomenon is that we're trying to recreate with these models. And that could be a big problem too, but we'll save that for another video. For this, we're just going to touch on like the psychological danger when you use these models without understanding the allure factor. So you can go on X, for example, and depending on what type of spaces you're in, if you're in the sports space or you're in the politics space, you might not be seeing this as much. But if you're in any tech space, any like science, metaphysics, philosophy space, anything where people who like to call themselves intellectuals are hanging out, you're seeing this more and more. But you end up coming across accounts and posts, like full threads that are clearly like AI generated. It's very clear, and some people use it for consolidating information quickly and then just touching up their own writing style, which I guess that's fine, whatever. I think there are long-term consequences to that as well. But you are literally coming across instances where people are outsourcing entire profiles to AI generated content. And they're taking this kind of obscure, sometimes esoteric prose, and they're just pasting it on these platforms, and they're posting it, and they're actually getting I don't know if it's like they're getting quite a bit of engagement. So it's popular, obviously. There are people who like that sort of thing. But it's kind of startles me when you are like using these platforms and then you're like looking for users to discuss ideas basically. You're trying to engage in dialogue. I think that's how these platforms are responsibly used. But then you come across like a situation, you come across like a discussion where like one person is very clearly taking arguments or taking tweets, plugging them into an AI, and then just pasting the output. Like they're not even citing it or screenshotting it. They're just taking the straight up text and pasting it back into the dialogue as though it's themselves talking. And I don't know, you can have different opinions about that. When I see that, I always think it's a little bit strange because, I mean, if you think it sounds really smart, then maybe I get that. You can take the credit for a very profound sounding idea and you don't have to do much work at all. So I guess I understand that. But the thing that's happening is that you're already starting to see this, and these models have only been out for a couple of years now. You literally have these people who they will not formulate their own opinion on a specific topic or an issue. They won't post it. They won't say it out loud. They will only defer to the opinion and the authority of these AI models. And this isn't like a speculatory thing. This is a self evident observation if you are in these spaces and you are observing these dialogues. And I can pull some up too. I should have prepared that before this video, but I, I just had thought, and once my train of thought starts going, I just pull up the mic and start talking. So I apologize for not being fully prepared, but we'll look at specific examples as well. I just want to talk like just from my anecdotal experience, but we're looking at like a wide scale shift toward AI dependency. And it's starting in the intellectual sphere, in the landscape of ideas and dialogue and thoughts and arguments. You're starting to see people who are fully outsourcing their own opinions and their own structured arguments to these LLMs. And so, what I want to say is, I think at first, something like that can seem like a very seductive option. Like, once you realize you have this tool that can take anything basically, and it can structure you a piece of writing, whether it's in the form of a tweet or whatever, and it can output it for you in a way that sounds both authoritative and confident. That's a really dangerous thing because when, I mean, people, they're putting their trust, frankly, into these vast data sets, and that's how they see it. They say this isn't like a person, this is a computer that is using objective information to provide an objective answer to any question. So once you get into that mindset, and then you realize you can use these systems in that way, and it becomes an almost like kind of like the social media, it becomes an almost addictive impulse to take every engagement you have or every issue you face and then run it through the lens of AI to make sure that you are getting the quote unquote objective analysis. And so maybe just using it to post on social media, that's a more innocuous thing. That's pretty innocent. And there are certainly people doing that without being irresponsible or malicious, or it's you can totally make the argument that it's a tool. It's people are using these models for their utility. But I think that becomes a slippery slope, and that's the point of the video I'm making here, is to, I don't know what the landscape is going to look like in the next 5 years, but I would be willing to stake some kind of wager on the fact that you are going to see swaths of people, like not just online, but in real life, that are effectively dependent on LLMs or AI software for forming a singular opinion on anything. Because we're not quite there yet. Maybe some people are, but it's more so on the fringes. It's more so in these online spaces. And you're not seeing it like day to day necessarily. Maybe if you work in tech, you see it a lot more. But the natural progression of a behavior like this, and once it becomes, say, as socially acceptable as using apps like social media, and maybe it already is, I don't know, then you're looking at a situation where, like, as a society, as a collective, it starts at the local level. It starts like with individual conversations, social media interactions, maybe disputes or issues at work, that sort of thing. But the more and more that we feed and outsource our problems to quote unquote objective machines, not as like a tool necessarily, but as a deference to authority. Like the moment we are pointing to the answers that we're getting from these machines and saying, hey, this is what the AI says, so this is what must be true. I think that's when it gets very, very dangerous. Because yes, when you have the perspective that, well, hey, why would I ever not rely on these systems when they're going to be permanently accessible? I can get infinite usage from them. There will likely be no situation where I can't consult an AI to make a decision or form an opinion. Why would I ever not do that? Why should I ever restrain myself or use discretion when it comes to these apps? And that whatever. Maybe that's a very tempting stance to have. And maybe that's how a lot of people are unironically thinking about the horizon of technological innovation. Like, why would we not outsource everything to artificial intelligence? And my answer to that would be maybe we should to an extent. But the key is heavy emphasis on to an extent. Because the moment that your reliance comes at the expense of your own ability to critically navigate these things, the moment you are unable to step in between yourself and the AI and say, hey, actually, this is wrong. The way that I'm projecting or phrasing this question likely has a lot to do with the types of answers that I'm getting. And so maybe I'm not actually getting like an objective opinion. Maybe I'm getting a specifically geared opinion on the basis of a very specific context window. Because that's realistically what's happening. That's what you're getting when you're interacting with these LLMs. Because yes, they're trained on vast amounts of data, but they are deeply limited and constrained by factors that aren't immediately obvious to us. And then when you throw in the fact that OpenAI is programming these systems to cater towards people in a, how do I put it, almost like endearing way, then you reach a situation where people, when the dependency becomes much more than just informational, it like becomes, for example, emotional or relationship based. And then you start having people who, they form the line of argumentation that says, hey, well, if these models they're a lot smarter than us, they're a lot more aware than us, they're a lot more empathetic than us. What really would be the harm if I formed a emotional bond with this model? And then you use that to fulfill some of the human level needs that I have. Well, again, it's the same thing because on paper, I think it sounds really, really nice. Maybe for some people, it sounds absolutely outright horrific and disgusting to even consider something like that. But we have to keep in mind that people's brains work differently, and that sort of prospect becomes very, very attractive for the right type of person. So I think we're going to be walking a very fine line between what is socially acceptable, what is considered beneficial, And then what is like collectively ideal when we're trying to form a societal attitude towards these machines that are going to become more powerful than we can probably imagine. But just because they are powerful in a computation based way does not mean we should be outsourcing our own human development as a means of total deference to digital authority. And that's the prediction that I'm going to make right now. I genuinely think, whether it's a few years or 5 years or 10 years or whatever it is, we are going to be looking at a landscape where people are entirely dependent on these models for a number of ways. Not just informational, but I mean, it's going to get to a point where people are emotionally dependent on these LLMs. And I'm going to go back, I'm going to reiterate my point where I think when you understand how they work, you use them effectively, and you use them, for instance, to efficiently teach yourself, say, a new skill, or to get an objective perspective on a nuanced situation. But you always keep in mind that this is a constrained perspective. It's a constrained response. It sounds very authoritative. It sounds very nice, but it's still not the final word. It's a very specific aspect. It's a very specific perspective on reality, which is much more nuanced. If you can keep that attitude and you can filter your engagement through that kind of asterisk that says, well, these things, they sound very confident, but we have to be careful when it comes to putting our full trust into them. Once you lose the ability to do that, and then you become completely reliant, then you're going to get some really strange situations, man. You're going to have people falling into some very, very weird rabbit holes and very, very weird spirals because they are now in love with the computer. I know it sounds crazy. I know it sounds whatever, but I mean, when you think about what these developers are doing, how they are designing these models, they are designed to appeal to our emotional side, to form those emotional bonds, and to cater to our certain psychological needs. So unless you're taking the active steps on the front end to monitor how you're engaging with them, to monitor how your dependency on them is evolving and all that stuff, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to be very, very strange, and it's going to come at the expense of our natural human development. Because you can't fully outsource your own growth, your own human growth, to these types of platforms or to these types of models. There will be consequences, and it will look strange. Like it could get ugly, because all of that trickles down into your life, trickles down into your relationships, it trickles down into your self-respect and your mental health and all that stuff. And I just feel like if we're not aware of this, we don't kind of catch it in the early stages, I don't know. You're going to have enclaves of people who go down some really weird, really strange rabbit holes with these models. So at the end of the day, everything is relative and subjective. And I'm sure you have people out there who think any type of use is dangerous. And then you have people out there who think if you're not using AI for everything, you're stupid. But again, like everything, there's kind of a nuanced line that we have to look for and decide what is ultimately desirable for ourselves individually and collectively. And then we have to orient our relationships with this really powerful technology around our end goals. It's going to be difficult probably, and it's going to be impossible to do perfectly, especially when everyone starts using them. But oh my gosh, we're going to have to figure it out.